This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Stanley Balcom Puffer III, and I reside in Wellfleet, Massachusetts.
Where did you grow up?
Basically, I was born in Arlington, Mass, and I grew up there until I was about 13. And we used to come down here, and we used to spend summers in Brewster. My great-grandfather used to own a farm in Brewster on Route 137, and he put his farmhouse up for sale, I think back in 1957, which is when we moved here. So I moved here in 1957 and ended up going to school at Nauset that had just changed into a regional high school back then.
How did your family react when you told them you were going to war?
Well, at the time that I went in, which was in basically around October 2nd, 1962, we weren't at war when I went into boot camp. I signed up earlier in July of 1962 is when I signed up, and then I went to boot camp in October of 1962.
At what age did you join the military?
I joined the military basically when I was 17 years old, but went in after my 18th birthday, which was in September.
How did you feel the first time you got deployed?
Well, the first time the ship that I went to was basically in rehabilitations, going through what they call remodelization. And I think we didn't deploy until maybe June. We went what they call the Westpac cruise, which is the Western Pacific. And during that time, we weren't at war. I was actually kind of excited to go off and see different sites, different places.
Where were you stationed?
Our home port was San Diego. We were home ported. But when we left to go to Westpac, we went to the Philippines, we went to Okinawa, we went to Japan, we went to Hong Kong, Formosa. That was on the first cruise.
What was your job during the service?
My job in the service, I was down in the engine room. I was a machinist mate.
What was the most challenging part of your job?
Well, it was probably basically standing watches. When we were later on the second cruise is when we ended up going to Vietnam, down in the engine room, and the temperature used to get to around 130 degrees.
Describe your typical day in service.
A typical day in the service, usually if we were at sea, we would basically get up at Reveille, and we'd have to muster up on the fantail around 7 o'clock, and then we would go to our assigned duty stations. We would either go down the engine room, or if we had the watch, then we would have to stay on the watch, running the basically run the distillation plant to make water, and also the propulsion engines to drive the ship.
What was your favorite aspect of your day-to-day job?
Well, that's a tough question. Probably lunchtime, or when we used to have the breaks. We used to stand 8 hours on and basically 16 hours off.
Describe your typical meal on board.
Well, we always usually had a hot meal, unless we were in a combat situation. Then we had sandwiches and stuff. But usually we would have, a hot meal, beans, hot dogs, sometimes steak, sometimes spaghetti.
Who was someone in particular that you had the strongest bond with?
I had a friend of mine, I think his name was Curtis White. Anyways, him and I were pretty close. After the service, we kept in touch for a little while, but then we kind of drifted apart.
Do you stay in contact with anyone else from the war?
After I got out of the service, probably later on, 30 or 40 years after I'd left, I joined this John R. Craig reunion association and reestablished contacts with a lot of my fellow shipmates back then.
What were the most challenging weather conditions that you faced in the Navy?
We went through 2 typhoons, and it was some pretty hairy rolls.
What did you miss most about civilian life while you were serving?
Well, basically you have to be at a specific place at a specific time, and basically the regimentation. It was good for me. I think
What was your happiest moment during the war?
it's probably Liberty Call. Pull into Hong Kong and go on Liberty.
What was the scariest memory from your service?
Probably going through the typhoon.
Can you describe more about how that was?
Well, basically, I think it was Halsey back during World War II. They got stuck inside a typhoon, his task force, and he lost something like 3 destroyers. And the destroyer is a long, narrow craft, and it goes 10 directions at once. So that was pretty scary. We had straps in, and if we went to sleep in our bunks, we'd end up strapping ourselves inside our bunks so we wouldn't go flying out.
Why did you choose the Navy?
I chose the Navy because you got to travel around, and you also basically had basically a comfortable place to sleep, and you usually had a hot meal.
Who did you miss most during your service?
Probably my family, my mother, brother, sister.
What was the biggest adjustment coming home from war?
There wasn't really any big adjustment for me. I came down here, and basically there wasn't hardly any work down here, so I ended up moving up to Boston and working in the shipyards up there.
If your son or daughter wanted to enlist in the military, how would you feel?
I don't know. I'd probably have mixed feelings about it.
Can you describe more?
Well, it's something worthwhile. Military is not for everybody.
What was the most difficult decision you had to make?
Whether or not to stay in, or basically to get out.
What did you do in your off time?
We did in our off time. Well, we usually went over to the Enlisted Man's Club, or we went ashore, and being, 18, 19, 20 years old, we usually hit the discos and that sort of thing.
How did you feel being away from your family?
Well, I used to come home on leave about maybe once a year.
How long was your leave?
We usually had leave. We had up to 2 weeks.
How did you make friends during your service?
Well, we made friends with our shipmates, mainly the guys that we used to work with.
What did you think about your higher authority and your bosses?
Most of them were pretty decent.
Were you friends with them?
To a certain point, yes.
Which places were you most interesting?
I would say Hong Kong, Yokosuka, Japan. They all were pretty interesting in their own way.
Could you come off ship and look at the sights around Hong Kong?
Yes, we did. As a matter of fact, I went to a floating restaurant. Me and a friend went to a floating restaurant in Aberdeen.
What was it like to get your uniform?
Basically, what you did when you went into the service, when you went into boot camp, they lined you up with your sea bag, and they held your sea bag open, and they took and they measured you, and they basically threw your required uniform and required stuff that you needed inside your sea bag.
What was the favorite thing that you saw?
Favorite thing that I saw? That I don't know what. There's nothing in particular.
What is one word you would use to describe your service?
It was a learning experience.
What was your least favorite aspect of your job?
Least favorite was probably maybe mess cooking.
Where did you serve the majority of the time of your service?
The majority that we spent was usually at sea.
What rank are you most proud to have earned, and why?
I achieved the rank of machinist mate 3rd class.
Tell me a funny story you experienced that only could have happened in the military.
I can't think of any not right offhand. Maybe a little later.
Tell me a little about your time in boot camp.
Our time in boot camp, what we did was basically indoctrination. We would, they would teach us the different aspects of the Navy and basic seamanship. A little bit about damage control on board the ship, learning the different rates and the protocols.
How did you communicate with friends and family at home while you were at war?
Usually letters, and once in a while, if we were home ported, it was usually a phone call.
What were your living conditions like? Where did you sleep?
Basically, we slept in what they call a berthing compartment, and we slept on racks, and there was usually 3 people to a rack, sort of like in a hammock.
What was the environment like in Vietnam?
It was hot. It was very hot. We were anchored in Da Nang Harbor, and that was back during when was it? It was back during 65 and 66, and basically the United States, we had advisors over there, but we didn't have boots on the ground, so we weren't allowed to come ashore. So we ended up spending our time at a mooring site.
What were your strengths at your job?
What was my strengths at my job? Well, basically I knew my job pretty well.
Describe in detail what you had to do for your job.
Well, what we did, we maintained, operated, and repaired steam propulsion equipment on board the ship, which includes the pumps, the pumps, the turbine engines, stood watches.
If you could go back, would you do it?
If I could do it over again, yeah, I probably would.
Do you think you would choose a different job to do? Or would you go back to the same job?
I'd probably do the same thing. What I do now, I have volunteered my time to go up to the Joseph P. Kennedy. I don't know if you know, that's up in Battleship Cove, and I donate my time to work up there.
Describe your darkest memory.
We had a guy on board ship who basically he ended up getting 3rd-degree burns working on the ship. He got steam burns, and he got burnt up pretty bad.
What was your biggest health scare while at war? Or did you have any?
Nah, I don't think I actually had any. Sunburn. One time, we were home ported in San Diego, and me and a friend, we went over to, I think it was Balboa Park, and we laid on the beach for about 10 hours and ended up coming back looking like lobsters. Got pretty sunburned pretty bad.
Was it hard to maintain a friendship? Did people come and go a lot, or did you stay with the same guys throughout your service?
No, people came and go, but you accepted it for what it was.
And for how long did you serve?
I served for 4 years active and 2 years in active reserve.
What did you do for your inactive? Can you describe that?
It was mainly just emergency standby.
What was it like to arrive there? What was your first thought when you first stepped onto the boat?
Well, when I first went aboard the ship, basically I flew from, I'd come home from leave, and I flew out of Boston and flew basically to San Francisco. Our ship was in dry dock, and they were doing this frame, which is a remodelization. So we ended up sleeping in barracks. And I slept on barracks, and they assigned me to they called it a soap team. It was supply team, and basically what we did, we checked off parts as they came in.
Where else were you stationed? Did you only stay in Vietnam, or?
No, basically we actually made two cruises. The first cruise that we made, we left the home port of San Diego. We went to Pearl Harbor. From Pearl Harbor, we went to Subic Bay, which is in the Philippines. From there, we went to Japan. We went to Yokosuka, Japan, Sasebo, I think, and Kobe, Kur. And we also went to Kaohsiung and Taiwan. We used to patrol the what they called the Taiwan Straits, which is the land between Taiwan, the island of Formosa, and China. We patrolled that back and forth to make sure that the nationalist China didn't come over and attack the island of Formosa, where the Free Chinese fled back then. Matter of fact, we were in Kaohsiung when we learned, I think it was in '63, that President Kennedy had been assassinated back then.
Did you experience any casualties in your service?
No, not from combat action.
Did you make friends with any foreign people? Did you ever?
I had a couple girlfriends that I used to write, but one was in Hong Kong, and I think another one was in Longpole. But you know, things move on.
What do you remember most about the day you enlisted?
The day I enlisted, I hitchhiked up to Hyannis and signed up with a recruiter and hitchhiked my way back home and told my mother that I have enlisted, and she threw a fit, but you know, it was something that I was going to do. She had to sign the paper because I was going to turn 18 in September, and I didn't need permission then.
Why was she upset that you were enlisting?
Well, because basically she didn't want to see me go was basically the reason.
Why did you want to enlist?
I wanted, well, because I'd quit school back then, and I was I worked a couple of jobs down here, and basically they were mainly seasonal. So
you said you learned a lot in boot camp. What were some of the things that you had to learn?
Well, you had to learn basic seamanship. Had to learn the difference between port and starboard, and fore and aft, and also how the ship is set up. Also, you have to know the proper protocol, you know, what the ranks of the officers are and how to identify them. You also have to learn a little bit about the routine and what you're going to be doing. And that was pretty well basic seamanship, stuff like that.
You said there was a routine. What was the routine?
Well, the routine was that you would wake up, you would go to chow, you'd go to your duty station, then you would break for lunch, then you go back to your duty station. Normally we'd knock off at around 3, 4 o'clock, unless you had a watch. And usually on a watch, we usually had 3 shifts, 3 8-hour shifts. And depending upon what watch that you had, you stood your watch. And the watch could consist of, we'd be either making distilled water or you'd be overseeing the plant. Because if we were tied up to a mooring, we used to generate our own electricity. Or if we were at sea, we would do all these things, plus I thought we'd run the main engines and adjust the throttles to maintain a certain amount of speed.
During your off time, what was a game that you remember that you guys played?
We used to shoot pool. We used to go over to the local bars, I guess, and shoot pool.
Were there any requirements for joining the military?
Well, you had to have you had to be able to pass a physical exam, have a certain IQ.
What was the IQ that you had to have?
Basically, I don't know, but I passed, so.
Were there any women on the ship that were working with you?
No.
Right. So it was just men?
Just men.
What was your higher authority like? You said that you were friends with them in a way, so
Yeah, well, usually we would have in charge of the engine room, we would normally have a first class petty officer. And we would also have a chief on top of that. And usually those guys were pretty decent, pretty easy to work with.
Would you have wanted to be in the higher authority as well with them? Or did...
Well, yes and no. But by that time came around, it was time for me to leave, to get out.
Were you excited to leave, or?
Yeah, I was anxious to get out and go off on my own, find a job.
What was the pay like?
The pay, I forget what it was, maybe something like around $200 a month, something like that. But then again, you had all your living expenses paid and your medical and everything else. So.
If you didn't go into the service, what would you have done instead?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'd probably be, I don't know, maybe doing building or construction or something like that.
What did you do when you got out of war?
Well, when I got out of work, I went to work up at the bar at the Bethlehem Steel, which is a shipyard. I went to work there as a outside marine machinist, and also when I went there, I also went to school evenings, part of the GI Bill, for basic refrigeration and electricity.
How often do you think about your service, or at all? Do you think about it?
Well, basically when we had the reunions now, I keep in touch with some of the shipmates that I had, and I'll think about it from time to time.
Do you enjoy your reunions?
We did, but we had the last one maybe about a year ago because the rest of my shipmates are basically getting too old and they're dying off, so it's too much of a struggle.
Where did your other shipmates go after they left? Do you know where they went?
Yeah, some went to the Midwest, some went to the East, some stayed in California. They went back mainly to their hometowns where they were from.
You said that a year ago was your last reunion.
Yes.
If you could, how soon would you want another reunion?
Oh, I don't know. That would all depend upon whether or not we could get the same group back together.
What was this? What was the group?
Usually you'd have maybe about 25, 30 people in the group. The ship that I was on, that was commissioned in 1944, and they sunk it as a target in 1980. So you have that time span of maybe about 55 years in that vicinity. So you had quite a few, but as I say, you know, as the people got older, they're slowly dying off, and a lot of them just can't make it.
What experience from your service affects you most today? Like, do you still use anything that you learned?
Yeah, basically mechanical skills. I learned that from my years in the service, and also when I did refrigeration work and air conditioning, I did that also.
What did you learn about yourself that you now realize that the war taught you?
Well, basically to believe yourself and, you know, mainly just keep on going.
So you would say that that was your most...
Mainly self-confidence.
So that was the most important...
Self-confidence to strike out on my own. And
is there anything you see or hear that takes you back, like a flashback to your time?
Yeah, I want to go and work on that Joseph P. Kennedy that's up at Battleship Cove. That's basically the same type of ship that I was on, a gearing class, so a lot of that stuff brings back memories.
What was the ship like? You said it was similar to the ship that you served on.
Yeah, it was mainly, I'd say roughly 300 feet long and probably maybe about 50 feet wide. It was long and narrow. And I've got pictures of it, I'll show it to you.
Did you ever get lost, or did you find your way around?
Uh, well, basically we just head for the water. You know, if we were going ashore and we'd find out, you know, where are we, we'd basically look towards the water and head towards there.
What are some habits that you developed during your service?
I sleep very lightly.
What type of things would wake you up?
Usually noise, people talking, whatever.
How were you with the sea and like seasickness? Did you ever get sick?
Yeah, we got really sick. Going back to a funny incident, what happened is after our ship had left the yards and we went out for sea trials, and the whole lot of us had been about a year since we've been to sea. And what happened, we were in San Francisco, we went past the Golden Gate, everybody started getting seasick. We had what they call a midship passageway, and we also had the heads, the toilet areas. We had guys wrapped around the commodes who were puking and everything else. What happened, the captain came back and decided to finish his sea trials in San Francisco Bay, which he did, and he wound the ship up to something like 30 knots as fast as it would go, and made humongous waves and wiped out a bunch of pleasure boats. And when we pulled into port, it was just a wall of brass coming down wanting his hide for that. But yes, it used to take me about a day or two to basically get my sea legs.
Is there anything you miss about your service?
No, not really. Well, I missed the travel, but then my wife and I, we've been on several cruises before on different cruise ships. So.
What did you do when you came home?
Well, when I came home, by that time my mother had gotten remarried. She moved to Wellfleet. And when I came home, there wasn't much in the way of jobs around here. So what I ended up doing, I ended up going down to the unemployment office, and they wanted me to basically go to work for Pratt and Whitney up outside of Hartford, and I said no. So I ended up going to work for Bethlehem Steel up in East Boston.
Do you believe it was hard to find a job after, or did you find it easy?
Well, it was pretty easy. They practically hired me on the spot when I went up to East Boston. It was a union shipyard. What would happen is, as soon as the ship they were working on left, basically your job was over. So I ended up going to work for another shipyard called Broomfield Shipyard, which is non-union, and there you basically had work there year-round.
Did you start a family soon after you came home from war?
Yeah, I would say in about 2 years. I got married and anyways moved up to Maine, worked with my father working on restaurant equipment, stuff like that. And then I ended up moving down here in Wellfleet back in, must have been around 69.
What was the longest time you went without coming home?
Longest time was probably about a year.
Why do you still work with ships after the military?
I know, mainly just to donate my time and kind of relive old memories.
Was there any challenges coming back from war?
No, not actually. I just went about my business. When you got back, I think the state of Massachusetts gave us something like a $300 or a $500 bonus for being in a war zone.
How did you cope after your service, or did you cope at all?
I didn't cope at all.
Define a hero.
A hero was probably somebody who gave his life over there in the service.
Do you remember seeing anyone give their life over there?
No.
Or anything like that?
No.
Did you meet any heroes?
No, not in the service.
We are just about out of time. Thank you very much for this interview.
Very good. Okay.
We will end with this final question. What advice would you give someone today that is going into the war now?
Basically, choose your branch of service wisely, and decide basically what you want to do, and if you're going to go into a Pacific area, to a Pacific job or a billet, see if there's something that you can use on the outside, if you could use your training.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.